Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to dive into one of the absolute most fascinating questions in human history. We look around today at our governments, our laws, our massive social orders, and it is so easy to just take it all for granted. But none of this existed at the very beginning. So today, we're going to explore how a handful of scattered tribes essentially coded the DNA of an entire civilization, evolving into a highly organized, institutionalized nation of millions. Picture this, a tiny 50-person tribe. In the distant past, people lived in these small, tight-knit groups, relying purely on blood ties and a shared ancestor just to survive floods, droughts, and wild animals. The leader had prestige, sure, but their actual power was heavily limited by tradition. So how on earth did humanity scale that up into a sprawling civilization with vast professional armies, complex laws, and massive cities? Well, to answer that, let's take a quick look at our agenda. We're going to trace a 2,000-year evolutionary journey across 5 key steps. First, from tribe to state. Second, the Shang Dynasty and the birth of the state form. Third, the Shang Dynasty's civilization and institutions. Fourth, the Zhou Dynasty establishing world order. And finally, the underlying code of Chinese civilization. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, from tribe to state. It's really like night and day when you compare early tribes to early states. Tribes worked beautifully when the world was vast and sparsely populated. But as agriculture developed, populations absolutely boomed. Suddenly, more people needed more land and more resources. A small tribe held together just by family bonds simply couldn't manage this new complex reality. To survive the forces of nature, scattered tribes in the Yellow River Basin literally had to fuse together. Legendary figures like the Yan and Yellow emperors symbolize this massive era of tribal fusion, moving us away from basic blood-based survival and forcing the creation of complex organization and centralized authority. Which brings us right to Section 2, Xia Dynasty and the birth of the state form. Think about the legendary story of Yu the Great. At the time, the Yellow River Basin was experiencing catastrophic, existential flooding. Previous leaders tried to just block the water and, well, they failed. Yu changed the strategy to channeling and dredging the water out to the sea. But to actually pull this off, Yu didn't just move water. He essentially built a state. He had to organize massive populations, mobilized unprecedented resources, and force totally diverse tribes to work together. He solved the core problem of organizing society. Authority officially shifted from just having the right bloodline, or being the oldest, to having actual tangible management capability. So, to lock down this brand new national structure, the GI introduced something totally revolutionary, the hereditary system. A supreme ruler emerged, the king. Now, you might be wondering why transition power exclusively through a family lineage. Well, early states were incredibly fragile. If every time a strong leader died, society fell into a vicious, bloody war for power, the state would just collapse. Keeping power within a single family was a highly pragmatic solution to ensure political stability and avoid total chaos during leadership transitions. It gave China its first true state form. But hey, having a state form doesn't guarantee it's going to last forever, right? The Shang Dynasty eventually came to an end under a ruler named King Ji. His reported cruelty and obsession with pleasure sparked widespread conflict. And this brings up a really fascinating historical question. Why exactly do established dynasties fall? Let's find out in Section 3, Shang Dynasty, Civilization and Institutions. The leader of the Shang tribe, a man named Tang, overthrew the Xia on a principle that would echo throughout history, the idea that the previous rulers had lost popular support. And the Shang didn't just take over the throne, they rapidly developed a highly specialized society. Suddenly, you have distinct groups emerging. We see dedicated farmers, highly skilled bronze artisans, a distinct noble class, powerful priests, and professional armies. The sheer complexity of the state just completely leveled up. But perhaps their absolute most profound breakthrough was oracle bones. They would carve questions into turtle shells and animal bones, heat them until they cracked, and priests would read those cracks to divine the future, asking about harvests, the weather, or going to war. But think about what this actually means. For the first time, human experience didn't just rely on fraud or word of mouth. It was written down. It could be saved, recorded, and passed on. Knowledge could finally compound over time. And bronze? We really shouldn't just look at their famous bronze casting as beautiful ancient art. Bronze was the ultimate physical symbol of state power. I mean, to make a massive bronze vessel, you have to mine the ore, transport it, feed the miners, train the artisans, and organize the entire production line. It was essentially a masterclass in ancient logistics and supply chain management. Only a highly advanced, deeply organized civilization could pull something like this off. And those oracle bones I mentioned earlier, they actually give us incredible, concrete details about this era. During the peak of the Shang Dynasty under King Wu Ding, the records reveal fascinating figures like Fu Hao. She was a queen, but remarkably, she was also a highly influential military general, literally leading massive armies into battle over 3,000 years ago. It really paints a picture of a society that was dynamic, powerful, and constantly expanding its reach. But expansion always comes with a heavy price. Despite their immense power, internal conflicts among the nobility and exhausting, long-term wars eventually drained the Shang. This forced the next rising power to solve a brand new puzzle. How do you actually maintain order over an increasingly vast territory without tearing yourself apart from the inside? And that puzzle leads us straight into Section 4, Zhou Dynasty, Establishing World Order. Tracking the timeline of events, we see the Zhou people rapidly rising from the west. Capitalizing on the Shang's internal decay and sheer exhaustion, the Zhou formed a massive alliance and won the decisive Battle of Muay around 1046 BC. The Shang fell, and the Zhou swept in to establish a brand new regime with a very, very different approach to governing. To legitimize this massive transition of power, the Zhou introduced a foundational piece of historical philosophy, the Mandate of Heaven. The idea here was that absolute power wasn't just a natural birthright. It had to be continuously earned through virtuous governance. The logic was that the Shang lost the mandate because they became cruel, and the Zhou gained it by caring for the people. It was a completely revolutionary idea that permanently bound the ruler to the welfare of the state. So, the crucial question is, how did they actually run this massive new empire? Well, they implemented the enfeoffment system. Since the king couldn't magically be everywhere at once, he distributed territory to relatives and loyal allies. These lords went out, established their own vassal states, and in return they owed the king taxes, military support, and absolute loyalty. Think of it kind of like a giant political franchise system that created a remarkably effective decentralized network across a vast landscape. And to keep this sprawling network of vassal states perfectly stable, they developed the ritual and music system. Now, this wasn't just about putting on nice concerts. It was about locking society into a peaceful order by dictating clear, rigid behavioral norms for every single social rank. Your clothes, your daily responsibilities, the exact way you greeted others, everything was strictly defined by your status. The goal was simple. If everyone just plays their specific part, society remains in perfect harmony. Let's wrap things up with Section 5, the underlying code of Chinese civilization. If you break it all down, each dynasty was a completely necessary stepping stone. The Xia solved how to form a state out of scattered tribes, giving humanity a structure. The Shang solved how to develop that state, giving us institutions, bronze supply chains, and writing. And finally, the Zhou figured out how to lock it all into a cohesive, manageable order with philosophy and systemic networks. It's almost like 3 massive software updates for early human society. And these 3 dynasties laid the foundational code for all the thousands of years of empires that followed. Whether it was the centralized power of the Qin, the brilliance of the Han, or the incredible might of the Tang and Song dynasties, they all relied on this deeply ingrained DNA, highly valuing massive organization, demanding societal order, and maintaining an absolute, unwavering commitment to passing down culture through a shared written language. But, as we know, history is never static. As time went on, those Zhou lords out in their vassal states grew way too powerful. The king's authority weakened, and that rigid, harmonious old order ultimately collapsed into the brutal chaos of the Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods. Yet that leaves us with one crucial million-dollar question for next time. How did this exact political